You're with Julian on Review Sunday, and a review of one of the It films of the year, The Substance, which is making waves. I've been burnt by the last few It horror films that I've seen, the last 15 years for horror. I think that horror has been at the vanguard of movie making for the last 15 years. I feel like many of the most interesting art house films have come from the genre of horror. I think that the bog standard horror films have often been represented, like Insidious and Sinister and Smile, have been represented by very good films. But at the vanguard of filmmaking, from the likes of Under the Skin, The Witch, Hereditary, there've been just these Mandy, so many really good films with amazing visuals, amazing soundtracks, from people like Johan Johansson and Mika Levy and so on, and just absolutely artistically at the vanguard of filmmaking. It's probably the most important genre of the last 15 years. This year's It horror films have really left me cold. I thought that Longlegs was very perfunctory. I felt Blink Twice was very ordinary. So now we have The Substance, and wow, why not go out on a date night and watch The Substance with your crush, to have a similar experience to Sybil Shepherd going to the cinema with Travis Bickle in Taxi Driver. Coralie Fargeat, I don't know how to say her name, French director who made a film called Revenge in 2017, and this is her second film, and it is a massive statement. I think most people are aware of the plot now. Demi Moore stars as a woman that won an Oscar, a Jane Fonda-esque woman who in the 1980s has come to the end of her career. She's in her 50s. She's still stunning, and she does a workout show on daytime TV doing hot pants yoga. Pretty sterile version of hot pants yoga. Workout video stuff. And the whole country knows who she is, and they basically say, you're too old, we're going to get a younger, prettier model, and consign her to the scrap heap, where she confronts her age, her looks, her body, and everything. Through the opening third of the film contains as much nudity as you'll ever see on a major release film. So she comes in contact with this secret organisation that can give her back her youth and her beauty. So she gets on board with this, and it involves Margaret Qualley coming out of her back in one of a number of intensely gruesome graphic scenes. And the caveat is that 7 days a week Margaret Qualley can be out there with Demi Moore inside her to a degree that shifts, where she can live as Margaret Qualley in the younger, prettier body, and she goes out in that younger, pretty body and gets her old job back, because they're looking for a younger, prettier version of Demi Moore who they wanted to assign to the scrap heap. So that she's an instant success, and Demi Moore has to remain basically housebound, pretending that she no longer lives throughout this period of 7 days, and there's lots of sort of drugs that they have to administer to each other when each has their 7 days in the sunshine. And Demi Moore becomes more and more of a recluse during that period, and that's the first act of an incredible film, and I won't spoil it much further from there. The film itself, I think, is an incredible statement. It is one of those films that a lot of people are going to hate. I love gonzo films like Mandy, where they just push it so far, you can't believe how far they've pushed it, and they do that here. It is a wild ride. It's also beautifully shot and soundtracked, like fantastically shot and framed at times. One thing I did think about the music from Rafferty is it's quite derivative. I couldn't put my finger on it, but there's these really loud elephant noises that hit the soundtrack very, very well, and I can't remember if it's Under the Skin or where it's from, or maybe one of the Johan Johansson soundtracks, but I've definitely heard another film use that. And some of the shot framing is very Kubrick-esque as well. These interior spaces and long sort of narrow shots as well. It is incredibly violent. The opening third contains Margaret Qualley and Demi Moore naked for most of that period, and it's done incredibly well. I thought one of the most interesting aspects of the film is they're nude for virtually the whole third. When Margaret Qualley does her workout routines on TV, that felt twice as pornographic as seeing Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley naked, which I think was by design. I think that the Coralie Fargeat has shown to be an incredibly talented all-rounder here. It is 2.5 hours nearly, 2 hours 20 something, and it earns its 3 acts. It's written, I thought, an hour into it, 45 minutes into it, when it was coming to the end of the first act, okay, this was great, but how the hell are you going to fill the rest of the film? They do so quite well. The interesting side of this film is it's a feminist film. It's a film about the effects of sexism, but it's only about women. The men in it don't exist. Dennis Quaid has the only main male role in this film, and he's not in it very much. He clearly loved playing the character of this amazingly sleazy TV executive that ruined Demi Moore's life and then loves Margaret Qualley. It's really a film about Margaret Qualley and Demi Moore and their battle, often inside an apartment, which is frames the whole film. It's so interesting. I feel like the director here has stripped out so much. Another director would have followed this secret society and it would have become like, let's hunt down who's involved, and nothing superfluous is involved in this film. The lead characters, there's no husbands, there's no real boyfriends, there's no children, there's no fertility, there's no mum and dad. It is just the women, and there's no real men in the film. They're perfunctory things that appear every now and again. It's really the latent effects of the world that's been constructed and impacts on the people. Two people. It is a total two-hander between Margaret Qualley and Demi Moore. And if there are things that annoy me about this film, I think that it goes gonzo too early, because Margaret Qualley's character is written to be super vapid, and no one else in the film has a heart or empathy or experiences, distress, but Demi Moore. And her acting is absolutely career best. In fact, it's also a year of Margaret Qualley, because she's also starred in Kinds of Kindness recently as well. So she's having her biggest year since Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But Demi Moore, who I think is very painfully underused. I mean, she looks fantastic, but also the fact that when she showed up in Margin Call, she was fantastic in that film. And she hasn't had enough roles. She's obviously at her career best here. I thought she was fantastic. But they make it gonzo so quick that you kind of lose this. There's an awful lot of prosthetic makeup in this film. And body horror. It's a very violent, nauseatingly violent body horror film. And they take that away from Demi Moore quite early in the film. I felt like, will that impact her winning an Oscar for this film? I feel like it's shaping up to be a very strong year for the female lead actress Oscar. There's even Pamela Anderson's being talked about, but there's Kate Winslet and Demi Moore, and there's like these old timers that are in these massively acclaimed films this year for this year's Oscars. Anyway, she's magnificent. The gonzo nature of it, I do like films that go incredibly gonzo, and this does not hold back. I feel like she announced herself like Quentin Tarantino in two main ways. One is the boldness of her vision. She just doesn't give a shit about the audience or critics. She's made exactly the film that she wants. She's cut off everything superfluous to that and delivered it to you. But the other way, as with Tarantino, is how cinematically literate she is. There are so many films that this references. The main one, I think, is the criminally underappreciated John Frankenheimer of The Manchurian Candidate. He made a very controversial film in 1966 called Seconds, which had to have content removed and I think was given an X certificate. And that was about a balding middle-aged man who is contacted by this secret company that can rebirth him as a younger, prettier man, who is Rock Hudson in probably his best ever role. And that's the film that is most referenced by The Substance. But there's also the work of David Cronenberg, particularly the likes of Videodrome and The Fly and a few of his other dystopian films as well. And the shot framing often references Kubrick, but there's also some blood splattering that really reminisces, I think, deliberately of The Shining. There's David Lynch as well, not just his Hollywood films like Mulholland Drive and so on, but also his stuff like Eraserhead, where the father is like projecting these nightmarish visions on the baby that's coming, and Demi Moore is like projecting these nightmarish visions of her aging. I thought the most powerful scene in the whole film was when she has the posters of Margaret Qualley outside her apartment building, and she's constantly bombarded with the physical beauty and youth of Margaret Qualley. So she actually phones up this guy to go on a date because he's bumped into her in the street and he knew her from school and thinks she's the most beautiful woman in the world, and she's so low at that point. She wants to be with somebody that thinks that she is the most beautiful woman in the world, and she is putting on makeup and she looks great, and she sees Margaret Qualley out of the corner of her eye, and it all goes to hell. It's a brilliant scene. That's the kind of scene that people win Oscars for. Other films, Carrie, the whole prom experience of Carrie is another one that's heavily referenced here. The prosthetics, which are very heavy, no CGI here, very, very gnarly, disgusting, and it is an incredibly disgusting and violent film. The Toxic Avenger in those 80s films as well. So, I thought this was a fantastic outing. A few elements I would have probably, it probably goes a bit too early. I wouldn't mind the grounding of Demi Moore. Could have not had the horror film here. She could have just played Sunset Boulevard, another thing that comes to mind. She could have just played the fading actress and it would have been an outstanding role for her. But overall, really not much. You're not going to forget it. And even from the opening about the way they use a Walk of Fame style to show that like the aging process, shows that she's a fantastic director and writer and has complete control of her own domain. And for Demi Moore, there's seeing her at 61 in a film where she's naked so often might be Oscar bait, but I remember Isabel Huppert at 61 naked in Elle, in a film where she was still portrayed as somebody that was sexually appealing. And it was criminal that year that Emma Stone won an Oscar for the crap La La Land, and Isabel Huppert for Elle, one of the best performances this century, didn't. So who knows where Demi Moore will end up here, but it's a fantastic performance and an amazing piece of directorial and writing work. So I'm going to give The Substance a very solid 9 out of 10. It's going to be an easy top 5 film of the year for me, and who knows where it will end up.